So I'm 16 years old, and I have been in this info game for a while. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that the way that you create an info business that creates generational wealth for you is by creating content assets around it that pretty much create generational trust. And how can you expect to create generational trust when the thing you're talking about in your content is only going to be viable for the ICP for the next 6 months? So what many people do is that they simply try to speedrun as fast as humanly possible. It is to speedrun getting to $100,000 per month, USD. So they just try to speedrun getting to 100K a month and just try to get there as fast as possible. So fundamentally, how do you get to 100K a month? Well, how do you make money? Pretty simple. You have to create trust and extract trust from the market. We all know that. So what is the best method for extracting trust? Like, could be, let's say, giving people a shiny object, something new that they can relate to. So we have this like shiny object tactic. So shiny tactic. So you give people a shiny tactic with all this like sprinkles and shit that is kind of valuable. So what happens is that you give people this new tactic, this new business model, this new opportunity, you position it in a new cool way, right? And what happens is that, yeah, this works. You are suddenly printing and you're almost at 100K a month. But then what happens is that this tactic, this shiny tactic that you were teaching, suddenly no longer stops working. Or in 6 months or in a year after what you're doing. So you're at your all-time high, but the tactic stops working here. So what happens when the tactic stops working? Maybe you're, let's say, at 90 or 100K a month, doesn't really matter. What happens is that you suddenly lose all of your trust. So you're now almost back at zero. So what you do is, since that worked, you do the exact same thing. You just go and you build a new tactic, new shiny object, better marketing. You get here, but then again, you get to zero. And this thing just repeats. You go up and down, up and down, up and down until you die. And doing this, what's happening is that you are just creating something that does not scale. This is extremely fucking unscalable. How do you expect to scale this shit? Because it just, scale is unlocked when you can build leverage. When what is leverage? Leverage is compound interest. Leverage is this thing right here, which of course can happen if you're only operating this time frame because your tactic is only alive for 6 months. So how do you solve this? And how do you build and pretty much speedrun as fast as you possibly can to 100K a month without building a foundation that then gets you straight back to fucking zero? How do you do this? Well, it's pretty fucking cool. So, as I said previously, you want to focus on the contents of your content, what you actually talk about. So, when you think of a mechanism, a solution, what is a mechanism or a solution made up of? Well, simply put, if we think of like a mechanism or a solution, so say with this is a mechanism. What is it made up of? Well, it's made up of fundamental principles, but also situational variables. Principles and variables of the situational to the ICP. The way that a mechanism for doing outreach to fucking dental clinics, if that's who you sell to and that's what your audience's ICP is, pretty much, if you sell a fucking AI agency, the way you build an outreach method like that is by combining the principles of outreach and sales and psychology with the situational variables of your ICP. For example, they sell to dental clinics. The dental clinics have specific vocabulary. They, respond to specific words. They respond to specific, whatever it might be. Might be your ICP doesn't have case studies, so this is another situational variable. So you have all those situational variables and you combine them with the principles. So what you do is you pretty much combine them, okay, like this, or like this. You just have them, and when you combine them and they come into contact, you synthesize a mechanism. Now, the problem, as I previously, is that when you share a mechanism, number one, if you share too much value, so like this is the value scale, and this is like way too much value, and this is too little value. If you share too much value, what happens is that people, they just take the mechanism and they just simply run, and they just run and escape, and you pretty much replace yourself for free with some content. Not ideal. On the other hand, when you share too little, they just ignore you completely because they can't learn shit from your content. So what happens is that they just leave with nothing and they go to this guy. Pretty simple. Now, both of those are bad, and the middle is also bad. But either way, what's gonna happen is that this tactic, in a matter of time, is going to stop working. So all this trust you've created through this content, all these like sales assets, conversion assets, trust assets, all those throwing those buzzwords, all of that shit goes to fucking zero. So no longer works. You have just put all this effort to shit. Okay, simply put. Now, the way you solve this is by creating content around the constant of the equation. And what is the constant of the equation that does not depreciate in significance with time? That constant is, of course, fundamental principles. Fundamental principles. These things are fucking cool. Why are they so cool? Simply because a principle, well, it never goes out of fashion and just continues creating trust for you and just compounds and creates leverage for you. Simply because a principle is a principle. A principle is truth, and truth doesn't change. Truth is not dependent on external variables. A principle is something you apply to decisional variables to then come up with a mechanism. Simply put. So if you can teach that and not just the mechanism, what happens is that you pretty much create content that just continues creating trust for you, which eventually compounds, and you will soon be competing with Elon Musk if you do this for the next 50 years. But there is still a problem with it. I want you to imagine that, let's say, at the lowest level of value, or at least the highest level of value, at least you're gonna get this, it's pretty much the direct done for you solution. So we have the done for you solution is the most valuable thing, and above that we have a scale. Now, a mechanism or a tactic is, let's say, here on the scale, because it is closer to the done for you, like to the result, compared to a principle right here, which is a bit further away. So people, if you simply share principles, they're just gonna be fucking bored. They're not gonna be like, oh, let me just learn a principle and implement it. No, they're gonna be like, oh, I'm just gonna go to the guy who talks about the mechanism for free. I'm just gonna copy the whole thing and just tell him to fuck off. So nobody makes money. We don't want this. So, pretty much, how do you solve this? Because if you share tactics, then you're fucked. If you share principles, you're not that fucked, but you're still kinda fucked. So, how do you fix this? Well, pretty simple. What you wanna do is you wanna do both. And the cool thing about it is that you are combining a short-term approach with a long-term approach, meaning you get wherever you want, both the long-term goal of, let's say, $1 million per month, but also 100K a month, significantly faster than you would do if you just use one. So, how do you do this? Simply put, you want your content to be fundamentally based around the principles, but then around that, you also want to use tactics. So as I'm mentioning right here, you should have fundamental content that creates compounding trust, and then simply have the tactic be, how do you say, an example of the principle in action. So by doing this, what do? Well, you get the long-term effect of the trust, but you're also getting the short-term effect of sharing the tactic. Now, you might say, well, if I share too little about the tactic, they will just go to someone else. If I share too much about the tactic, then, they're just gonna run away. So how do I do this? Well, the small component that fixes this is that you are leveraging the fundamental principles to do two things. The first one is to pretty much give your ICP clarity on why they have a problem. And you do this through the lens of the first principles. And you give them so much clarity that now every single other person who tries to tell them how to solve the problem cannot give them that level of understanding on why the problem exists in the first place to even replace you. So even though you're not giving them the same amount of value in a short-term, time frame, because you are giving them so much clarity, and you're talking about these new things, these whole concepts you've got that you have synthesized yourself, not use AI, because if you use AI, then just go to AI, and then you just skip you, and you don't make any money. So quick side note, don't use Claude to synthesize those first principles. Read and synthesize them yourself. Pretty simple. And because you're also using that and you're giving them so much fucking clarity, they can no longer accept anyone else solving the problem for them, because they cannot give them as much clarity as you have given them through your extremely good fundamental principles. And what happens when you do all of this thing mentioned here is pretty simple. What happens is that you create a foundational baseline of trust, because your fundamental content will never go out of fashion. It's always going to remain valuable. Therefore, you cannot fall below this level of trust. Now, you have this foundation, you have this baseline. Now, upon that, you can create, let's say, a tactic like this. But then when that stops working, it falls back here, and it doesn't fall back here. It doesn't. So you have successfully managed to reach a higher peak than you would here, and also here, without falling all the way here. And the cool thing is that you can just repeat this whole fucking thing however long you want. You can just do this again, more fundamental, and then again, more tactical, but then more fundamental, a new baseline, new tactical. It's so fucking cool. One of the most legendary examples of this is Sam Ovens. We all know him. He's the fucking goat of business content on YouTube. The reason that his content is so fucking iconic compared to someone else's content is simply because his content, you can still watch it now, really no matter what level you're at, and you're still gonna be able to get value from it. It was from fucking 7 years ago. Imagine a dropshipping video from 7 years ago. That shit, nobody's watching it. But this one, it's getting attention and views at the same exact level and at the same exact rate it used to get 7 years ago. So you can go to view stats and check this out. I've checked it out myself, and I bet you that it's gonna be the same thing, because I've checked it. So pretty much, this is one of the most great examples of this. And sometimes, occasionally, he might share some specific tactics, but because the tactics are fundamentally based on these goated principles that he has thought of and discovered and synthesized, we still watch him, and everybody still trusts him, regardless of the fact that he's not doing info right now. He built one of the biggest consulting businesses in the world by doing this 7 years ago. The final question that you might be asking is, okay, that's cool, I want to share fundamental principles and use tactics as examples. Cool, but how do I actually do that? And how do I share the exact right amount of value? Because if you think of something like value, and this is like a slider, or this is like value, and the more this way you go, the more value there is. There is a point where there's too little value, so people just they just run away, or there's too much value where people just take your shit and they run away with it and they don't pay you because you just solved the problem for free. We don't want that. So there is a sweet spot in between those two where, you hear me out, this is fucking cool, because you have created these fundamental principles and also this tactic layer around it, and they also cannot escape you simply because you have given them so much clarity by using the fundamental principles that they just can't go to someone else. What they do is that they use the principles, and they use the principles to ask questions either to their brain, so this is their this is the brain, or to fucking Claude or some shit, or AI. If you give them, let's say, a lead magnet of how they can implement the principle, but only for a specific problem they have. You don't want to give them a lead magnet for how they can use Claude to solve the entire problem, because then you just made yourself, you know, expendable, and you just solved your entire thing for free and lost all your money. So you don't want that as well. So side note, you only want to do this for a specific problem, and for them to be able to synthesize a mechanism by asking these questions. But here, so they synthesize a mechanism by asking these questions. It requires them to go through a lot of fucking pain. It is very difficult, because like you have to iterate, you have to synthesize, you have to spend all this brain power. It's gonna fail, you're gonna have to do it again many times. But eventually, they might solve that little problem and they will get some sort of result. But then they're so exhausted and they're so like in so much pain, they are like, fuck it, let me just pay this guy 10k and just spend, let's say, 10k on this consultant or coach, whatever you want to call yourself, to do this for me. Pretty much the key quote I want you to take from this video, and it's a very fucking powerful quote, especially for info. It's pretty simple. It is, your goal is to simply give them enough information for them to trust you, but then also realize that doing it themselves is more painful than paying you 10k. You want to position the pain of them doing it themselves, the pain of inaction, the pain of not buying, as higher than just paying you 10k. That's how you want to do this, okay? So, what happens is that by doing this, you have them convince themselves that they need to go to you. So when they DM you to get a lead magnet for Claude or something, your seller just DMs them, and they're like so fucking happy that you can help them, that like, okay, that's like, here's 10k on the DM. This is a bit of an exaggeration, but you get my point. So, yeah, hope the video helps. If you want, you can subscribe. If you think that what I'm sharing with you is good, I'm just trying to grow this, it's documenting my journey, just like learning as much as I can about this game. So yeah, let me know if you have any things that you want me to cover as well, if you have any problems. And yeah, if you want, subscribe, like, and all the usual fucking YouTube stuff. So yeah, take care, bye.